Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 25th of February 2013, the podcast that's never too busy to be stressed. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's mutate the news of the bogus. And it's time for your favorite game show and mine, Stupid Patent Tricks. Yes, from the U.S. Patent Office, the same people who brought you a patent on swinging on a swing side to side, and a PB&J with a crust cut off, comes the latest new patent monopoly given to a big corporation, the milkman. Amazon.com now has a patent on, quote, recurring delivery of products. And how does it work? From the patent itself, quote, a customer creates a recurring delivery list that specifies a particular delivery slot indicating when orders are to be delivered. The customer adds products to the recurring delivery list, specifying a quantity and frequency of delivery for each product. If the customer makes changes to the recurring delivery list, those changes may also be applied to any pending orders generated from the list. Yes, something that's as old as Fiddler on the Roof has now been patented by a 21st century technology company. It's a pretty cool service, but geez, a full-on patent? Monopoly power that could conceivably be used to stop other online retailers from doing the same thing? Of course, we don't yet know if Amazon is going to do this. See, a lot of companies get what's called defensive patents, meaning they go ahead and patent a new feature to stop a competitor swooping in, patenting it, and preventing them from doing it. When you look at how ridiculous the patent system is, it's hard to blame Amazon. But the Patent Office? Hell yeah, we can blame them! In any system of patents, there's supposed to be a concept called prior art. Prior art basically says that a patent is invalid if information about the invention is available to the public and predates the filing of the patent claim. But that concept seems to be completely lost on the U.S. Patent Office. In addition to the patents mentioned, the U.S. Patent Office has also given patents for plugging a hole in a wall with plaster, carrying a towel around your neck, and exercising cats using a laser pointer. This is nothing new. The telescope, for example, was patented in the 1800s, even though they'd been around for centuries. And yet, no matter how ridiculous it gets, people keep insisting the patent system is needed, or else people just won't invent anything at all ever. Gee, so I guess it was a good thing that Johannes Gutenberg was able to get a patent on movable type, Antony van Leeuwenhoek a patent on the microscope, Ben Franklin the lightning rod, Jonas Salk the polio vaccine. Oh, wait! None of them got any patents for their inventions, and the father of American invention himself, Thomas Jefferson, never patented a single one of his inventions. There's also a nefarious side to patents as well. Imagine if Hans Lippershey had been able to get a patent on the telescope and stop Galileo from publishing his Sidereus Nuncius, his work demonstrating that the Earth and other planets go around the sun. Sorry folks, but patents are bogosity. They don't encourage or promote invention, they only encourage and promote bullying by big corporations against people who truly want to invent and experiment and further the progress of mankind. How on earth can people think the government restricting something, at the point of a gun like it always does, will somehow get you more of it? We've covered a lot of cases of bogus cops committing horrible acts and getting away with it. The solution, we're constantly told, is more accountability in government. Well, that would be nice, but it just doesn't seem to be in the cards. Case in point, the Charlotte Citizens Review Board, established 15 years ago to examine allegations of police misconduct. In all that time, and over 78 different cases, the citizens have never even won once. Not that citizens haven't tried, but, for example, family members of 5 men shot to death by police sought a hearing where they wanted to present evidence of police misconduct. They were denied a hearing. According to Pierce Murphy, former president of the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, that number of 78 cases in 15 years is, quote, remarkably low. According to civil rights lawyer George Daly, the first chairman of the board, quote, the review board gave the appearance of giving citizens a right to complain about police, but that right was an illusion. And according to Charlotte lawyer and former judge Terry Sherrill, quote, it looks like the Citizens Review Board is a rubber stamp for the police department. I wouldn't have expected the board to have ruled 100% in favor of police, even if it were essentially a rubber stamp. A study by the Charlotte School of Law found that citizens have very little chance of getting hearings, and the stronger the case, the lower the chance. That may go a long way to explaining 100% of all rulings favoring the police. They found that board members blindly believed the police and didn't take citizen complaints seriously. They also chided the board for a lack of transparency, including the minutes which contained boilerplate language but nothing in the way of key details of the case. Further, the citizens appearing before the board generally do not have lawyers, while the CMPD have their attorneys and legal investigators there in every case. Folks, asking for the government to be transparent and accountable is like asking the fox to keep a public inventory of the henhouse. It is impossible for the police to be right 100% of the time. The only way anyone could find that is if this were not a citizens oversight board, but members of a cult, siding with their leaders every single time while giving a half-assed appearance of propriety. And Charlotte is hardly unique in this. This kind of behavior is seen in citizen review boards all over the country. We need to stop falling for it. There's finally good news for Filipinos who, for years, have had to deal with health problems up to and including the death of children due to a vitamin A deficiency. After 12 years of battling with the elitist wackos who are opposed to genetically modified foods, golden rice will finally be available to be grown in the Philippines. Rich in vitamin A and relatively inexpensive to grow and produce, the number of lives this could save reaches millions, most of them children. According to environmental economist Bjorn Lomborg, 3 billion people depend on rice each year as their staple food item, and 10% of them are at risk for a vitamin A deficiency. In fact, as many as 500,000 children go blind every year as a result, and half of those die within a year. And yet, just 2/3 of a cup of golden rice a day will provide more than the recommended daily allowance of vitamin A. Golden rice is even better than spinach in that regard. Yet GMO opponents are still opposed to it. Greenpeace says, quote, "Golden rice is neither needed nor necessary." Smugly spouting misinformation on the level of Catholics saying that condoms cause AIDS, Greenpeace spouted, quote, "By encouraging a diet based on one staple rather than an increase in access to the many vitamin-rich vegetables, golden rice could, if produced on a large scale, exacerbate malnutrition and ultimately undermine food security." Hey, Greenpeace, they already have rice as a staple. All we're talking about is replacing it with more nutritional rice. What's it going to take for these ivory tower first worlders to realize that not everyone on this planet can just walk down to the organic food store for tofu? In fact, their entire report is riddled with pseudoscientific fear-mongering, spouting risks to health that just aren't there, and wildly exaggerating the amount of golden rice that would need to be eaten. And believe it or not, they actually claim that vitamin A supplements would be more effective, despite the fact that they're much more difficult to produce and transport and have a lot of problems such as low absorbability. In India, supplementation costs $4,300 for every life they save, and fortification about $2,700. Golden rice could do the same job for just $100 for every life saved. Make no mistake, Greenpeace is being every bit as irresponsible as anti-vaxxers. Listen to this incredible fail from Greenpeace. Quote, "Golden rice has been in development for over 20 years, yet no commercial applications have resulted, largely because of the complexity of the genetic engineering." No, Greenpeace, it's almost entirely because of political opposition from spoiled rich brats like you trying to push their extreme environmentalist agenda on the rest of the world. And if they continued to have their way, the graves would be filled with another 4.4 million children currently suffering from vitamin A deficiency. Now, thankfully, their saving grace is finally allowed. Here's hoping this trend continues worldwide. The one thing people have to understand about the gun control debate is that we don't have to speculate on what will happen if gun ownership is restricted. We can look at history and see the failure of every gun control measure ever undertaken. Case in point, the 1998 Massachusetts law that was hailed as the toughest gun control legislation in the country. It banned so-called assault weapons, semi-automatic rifles that aren't even as powerful as many hunting rifles, but look scarier, imposed very strict licensing, prohibited anyone convicted of a violent or drug trafficking crime from owning or carrying a gun for life, and even penalized people for storing guns unlocked. As usual, we'll let the politicians' promises be our guide. Did this gun control legislation live up to the claims it was made when it was passed? When Governor Paul Cellucci, a Republican, signed the bill, he claimed, quote, "It will save lives and help fight crime in our communities." Democratic Attorney General Scott Harshberger agreed, quote, "This vote is a victory for common sense and for the protection of our children and our neighborhoods." And John Rosenthal of Stop Handgun Violence predicted, "The new gun law will certainly prevent future gun violence and countless grief." Did it work? Spoiler alert! No. It did cut down on the legal use of guns in the state, with gun licenses dropping to about 13% of their 1998 level by 2002. This, too, was considered a predictor of safe streets and low crime. They could not have been more wrong. At a time when violent crime in the country has been dropping, gun crime in Massachusetts has gotten worse, with armed robbery increasing 20.7%, aggravated assault up 26.7%, and murders committed with firearms a whopping 47%. As many have noted, a lot of these gun control advocates are skeptics. Skeptics are supposed to admit when they're wrong in the face of the evidence. How many of them will admit that they're wrong now, that gun control fails again and again, and that gun prohibition doesn't work any better than drug or alcohol prohibition? Sadly, I do not advise holding your breath. This is yet another issue where so many skeptics just turn it all off and behave like the political woos we all oppose. Of course, they have their after-the-fact rationalizations already. The surrounding states had guns, so that's why it didn't work. But why weren't they pointing that out at the time that it passed? Surely they knew that surrounding states still allowed guns. Sorry, but if you don't specify these things beforehand, you're no better than a dowser making up excuses for not winning Randy's $1 Million Challenge. It's also completely self-defeating. As we've seen before, guns can be very easily made in secret by the black market, and all around the world these secret and very powerful guns are being used by Pakistani rebels, the Japanese Yakuza, the Chinese Triads, and many others. In India, you can get cheap single-shot pistols that can be easily destroyed, covering up the evidence of your crime. Many stories covering these can be found in a discussion on the Bogosity.tv forum entitled "The Black Market for Firearms." The link is in the show notes. It's not even the case that the bill simply did nothing to deter crime. Crime in Massachusetts began climbing after being steady before the ban. Murders, which had actually dropped to 1.9 per 100,000 in 1997, reached 2.8 by 2011. If you compare Massachusetts to its neighbors, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York, its murder rate was just 70% by comparison. Now it's up to 125%. Oh, but it can't be the firearm ban. Must have been something else that coincidentally happened at the same time. Maybe it was farmers selling raw milk. Yeah, that must be it. Better pile on some more regulations. And now it's time to refine the crude of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week, it goes to Washington Post columnist Stephen Mufson, who, sadly like so many reporters, has simply decided that he can speak out on a subject without doing even a modicum of research behind it. Case in point, his diatribe about the recent spike in gas prices, which he calls a mysterious climb. It is anomalous. In the last month, gas prices have jumped up 45 cents a gallon. Mufson blames all sorts of things: supply cuts by Saudi Arabia, refinery closures and maintenance, the bad economy. But strangely enough, the only thing he has to say about anything closely resembling U.S. foreign policy is market anxiety about tensions in Iran and Iraq, neatly sidestepping the issue. One might think that the U.S. waging war on so many countries and heaping heavy sanctions on Iran and Syria while beating the war drums there might merit more than a veiled reference via the word tension. But of course that would mean things like going against the Iran oil blockade maintained by a rider in the NDAA, which reduced Iran's petroleum exports by 40%. Not only must that amount be made up elsewhere, it's mostly made up by sour crude, crude oil that contains significant amounts of sulfur, which is more expensive to refine. It's hard to tell how much lower gas prices would be if Iran's much purer crude oil were allowed on the world market, but it would certainly be a noticeable amount. And of course, the sanctions do the opposite of what they're intended to do, which is hurt the Ayatollah. By artificially restricting the supply, what does get sold goes for much higher prices, which means more profits for Khomeini. He should write Congress a thank you letter. It is unconscionable that the news media not only remains silent about the effects of the foreign wars the US is involved in, but acting like it's all a total mystery, without even considering it? That's more than enough to qualify Stephen Mufson for this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to pluck naked this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Here's the thing about creationists. They have nothing new. They haven't come up with anything new in quite some time. Mostly they're just spouting off the same long-refuted nonsense as 20 years ago, so long periods of time go by, leaving skeptics with nothing else to debunk. But then, one of them says things that are just so incredibly moronic, even for a creationist, that we have to at least remark on it, if only to remind ourselves that these people are still out there and are still a potential threat. And funny how often it seems to be Ken Ham doing just that. If you're a creationist, you have to deny transitional fossils. You just have to. Acknowledge even one transitional form, and it's game over. So it's hardly surprising that one area of constant pain for them is feathered dinosaurs, showing a very nice smooth transition to modern birds. Last June, the discovery of yet another feathered dinosaur was published in Nature Communications. Dubbed Eosinopteryx, it sports what the discoverers called reduced plumage, as well as stubby wings, meaning it was probably flightless, a tailbone, teeth, and clawed digits on its forelimbs. Many bird features are completely absent, such as the morphology required for flapping wings and legs that are clearly adapted for running. All of this means that Ham must deny the transitional nature of this beast, no matter how much he has to squirm and spin to do it. Here's what he had to say in a recent blog post. Quote, "The authors of the report in Nature Communications note many features the fossil shares with living birds, particularly those that live on the ground." Yeah, Ken, it does have features in common with birds. If it didn't, it'd hardly be transitional now, would it? But what about the dinosaur features it has, Ken? And what about the bird features it doesn't have? Quote, "In fact, Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell and Dr. David Minton both examined the photos of the fossil and the criteria the authors used in classifying the fossil as a dinosaur. They agreed that it is a bird, not a feathered dinosaur." Yeah, well, since both of these scientists are with Answers in Genesis, you'll pardon me if I'm not impressed. Quote, "The researchers have based all their findings on the assumption that birds are just highly evolved dinosaurs. You see, their whole system of thought is so rooted in evolutionary ideas like common ancestry that they can't see the problems with their own analyses." And just what are those problems, Ken? Quote, hold on, I'm sure it's in here somewhere. Oh, it's not. Nowhere does he mention what these supposed problems are. He relies heavily on Elizabeth Mitchell's so-called analysis for support. Mitchell claims, quote, "Actual pennaceous, anatomically mature modern feathers, Eosinopteryx brevipenna is also a bird, not a tiny dinosaur." In other words, it must be a bird and not a dinosaur because it has feathers. And just what would she expect from a dinosaur-bird transitional? All she's saying is that it can't be a transitional because it has one feature of modern birds. Is she actually deluded enough to believe that? Or is she just another unashamed creationist liar? Listen to her explain away the scientific classification. Quote, "The animals whose anatomical measurements were included in the category of dinosaurs, however, included Archaeopteryx, an extinct bird, and even the ordinary house sparrow. Is it any wonder then that evolutionists considered this feathered animal to be a dinosaur? By these criteria, dinosaurs are tweeting in your backyard." Yes, Mitchell, birds are dinosaurs. Aves are classified under Dinosauria. But again, let's think about what she's saying. They compared the anatomy of a transitional fossil to that of a bird. And why wouldn't they? They also compared it to various dinosaurs in the theropod family. Strange how she left those out. There are a host of insurmountable problems in the evolutionary dinosaur to bird scenario. Respiratory systems, body aerodynamics, finger embryology, and the complexities of the feather compared to scales present issues of irreducible complexities for the evolutionary paradigm. Oh, and just what are these irreducible complexities? She doesn't say. This irreducible complexity garbage is just another creationist buzzword to explain away things they can't account for. When, of course, evolution has been predicting these irreducibly complex structures, that is, structures that cease to function if even one part is removed, for almost a century now. This claim had been debunked decades before the creationists even made it. Here's Mitchell's claims in a nutshell. If you look at Eosinopteryx and you ignore all the features that make it a dinosaur, it's just like a bird. Sorry, Mitchell, but you don't get to do that. As for Ham, he ends with yet another age-old canard, which proves that either he doesn't know the first thing about evolution, or he's an audacious liar, or both. Quote, "Through genetic loss and other factors, new species have emerged over time, but birds are still birds, and apes are still apes." Hey, Ham, if birds ended up being anything other than birds, that would falsify evolution. That's why birds are dinosaurs. They evolved from dinosaurs, and so birds are a kind of dinosaur, just like apes are a kind of mammal. Lies, ignorance, cherry-picking, and flagrant, incorrigible narcissism with the arrogance to pretend he knows as much as scientists and the unabashed immorality to knowingly pass on falsehoods. More than enough to consider Ken Ham's overblown sense of self-righteousness as ample qualification for this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this I've fallen and I can't get up edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you want to donate Bitcoins, you can use the Bitcoin address in the header at Bogosity.tv. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Bill Gates. If people had understood how patents would be granted when most of today's ideas were invented and had taken out patents, the industry would be at a complete standstill today. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported License. Bogosity. Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.